From the editors of Cook's Illustrated magazine, it's America's Test Kitchen. With your host, Christopher Kimball. Featuring Test Kitchen chefs Julia Collin-Davison, Bridget Lancaster, Becky Hayes, with Adam Reed in the equipment corner and Jack Bishop in the tasting lab. Discover the secrets of America's foremost food testers and tasters today on America's Test Kitchen. Today on America's Test Kitchen, Julia shows Chris how to make the best nut-crusted chicken cutlets. Next, Adam reviews food processors in the equipment corner. Finally, Bridget shows Chris how to make the ultimate crisp pan-fried pork chops at home. That's all right here on America's Test Kitchen. America's Test Kitchen is brought to you by DCS by Fisher & Paykel. America's cooks rely on innovation and culinary precision. DCS by Fisher & Paykel, offering premium indoor and outdoor kitchen appliances. For over 50 years, Miracle Grow products have helped home chefs grow fresh vegetables and herbs. Miracle Grow soils and plant foods provide the essential nutrients plants need to grow bountiful produce. Gardening tips are available online at miraclegrow.com. By Cooking.com, an online retailer for the kitchen enthusiast. If it's not in your kitchen, try ours. Chateau Saint Michel. Digital wine cellar and pairings can be found online. And by Kohler. Diamond Crystal Salt, the gourmet choice. Plum Amazins from Sunsweet.
You know, I'm not a beer nut, I'm not a macadamia nut, I'm not a Brazil nut, I'm not even a beech nut. I'm a peanut, Mr. Peanut to you. And me and my friends, what happens? We get thrown on foods willy-nilly like some cheap afterthought. So let's go into the test kitchen with Julia and figure out how to treat nuts with respect and make great nut-crusted chicken cutlets. So today in America's Test Kitchen, we have 3 stories of food and love. First one is my fiance proposed to me over a picnic lunch of turkey sandwiches and granola bars.
Aww.
How romantic is that?
They're on a budget.
I mean, come on. Okay, so the better one is the first ice cream I ever had with my wife. I kept the spoon and had it framed.
That's very romantic.
Unless it was a plastic spoon.
Right.
Okay. Here's my favorite, though. My husband proposed with breakfast in bed. He spelled "marry me" out of sliced smoked sausage, one of my favorite breakfast foods. Isn't that great?
Oh, that's my favorite.
Yeah. Well, now, I'm Mr. Peanut, so if anyone wants to propose to me out there, get nut-crusted chicken.
That's right.
So we can do that now?
Yeah. So the problem with nut-encrusted chicken is twofold. One, the chicken was really dry and overcooked, and 2, the nut crust coating didn't taste like nuts, and it was very leaden and dense. So tackling the first problem of dry chicken, what we're going to do is stab it a couple times with a fork in the thick part, and we're going to salt it. And this is half a teaspoon of kosher salt. We're going to salt both sides. And this is a lot like brining, of course, but without the moisture. Brining not only took extra time we didn't want to spend on this weeknight dish, but it also added a bunch of moisture into the chicken, which helps steam the coating and make it especially leaden. And believe it or not, the salt will get into those holes on the chicken and really help season it. And we're going to put it on a rimmed baking sheet. And if you could please put this in the refrigerator right underneath that food processor. And now we're going to focus on the nut crusted part of the recipe. We like almonds. Almonds are really nice. You can use pistachios or hazelnuts or peanuts if you so wanted to.
Wait, what do you mean you can use? Of course you can use peanuts.
You're right. So obviously we need to grind up the nuts so they stick to the chicken, and we're going to use a food processor. So that is a cup of almonds, 20 pulses or so, coarse crumbs.
All right.
That looks good, and you can just leave them in there. We're gonna get to them in a little bit. So we have our nuts nicely ground, and now we're gonna toast the topping. And part of what we learned is if you toast the nuts, of course, it brings out their flavor. But another trick we learned is to use butter and to get the butter brown. By browning the butter, you bring out its nutty flavor, and it really enhanced the nut flavor on the chicken. And meanwhile, I'm just gonna slice up a shallot, and of course, using a small knife on a small shallot makes it a lot easier. And you go in one direction, and you go in the other direction. And then you can either use a big knife or keep using the small knife. And you just mince it. And then we're gonna add the shallots. Of course, it'll continue to brown as we go. We're gonna add a half a teaspoon of this kosher salt. If you're using table salt, you want to cut the salt amount in half. So it would be a quarter teaspoon of table salt, half a teaspoon of kosher. That looks pretty good. Now we're going to turn the heat down to medium-low. We're going to add those nuts. And of course, this is 1 cup of breadcrumbs, and this special kind of breadcrumbs. These are panko. We're going to toast the coating for about 10 or 12 minutes, and that'll really bring out those flavors.
And now a word about panko. Panko is made from yeasted bread. They take a lot of the water out of it, and then they special method, they flake it.
Yes.
And the reason panko is so good is it doesn't absorb a lot of oil, for example, if you're sauteing or frying, so it keeps very crisp and very light.
And it's very flaky.
It's very flaky.
Yeah, much different than the Italian breadcrumbs you find in the market. All right, Chris, so this is the coating that we were toasting, which is 50% panko and 50% of those nuts that you ground up in the food processor. We're going to put it on a nice big rimmed baking sheet, which just makes it really easy when you're coating the chicken to have a lot of room to work with. And through this, we're going to flavor it with 2 teaspoons of grated lemon zest, a teaspoon of fresh thyme, and 1/8 of a teaspoon cayenne. We're just going to mix this up. All right, so that's our nut and panko mixture. Now, of course, we're going to do a bound breading, which of course is flour, then eggs, then the coating, so that it really sticks to the chicken.
Why would you need the flour? Why not just go from eggs to here?
Not only does it absorb the moisture from the chicken, but it also gives the egg something really tacky to stick onto, so the whole thing's well coated. And then the egg, of course, is what the breadcrumbs stick to. Okay. So we're going to use 3 eggs. We're going to flavor it with 2 teaspoons of Dijon mustard, and this is a 1/4 teaspoon of ground black pepper. You want to whisk it?
Sure.
Now, while you're doing that, I'm going to get the chicken out of the refrigerator.
Okay.
All right, so here we have our chicken. You can see how glossy it is and how that salt has really dissolved, and of course is flavoring the chicken. So we're going to pat the chicken dry. Now, you learn the hard way to use your hands for the flour, but then move to tongs for the egg and the breadcrumbs, or else you wind up with breaded fingers. You want to really make sure all the nooks and crannies and edges are coated. Let the excess drip off, and then right on the coating. You sprinkle it on. You want to really pack it on so that it really sticks and that there's no bare spots. And we're going to put it back onto a wire rack. Can we do a little assembly line? I'll leave you the tongs so you don't get dirty. All right, into the egg. So the other key we found with nut-encrusted chicken is a lot of recipes saute them, which is not only really messy, you have to do them in batches, but the coating has a tendency to fall off. So what we're going to do is we're going to bake them in a 350-degree oven for 20 to 25 minutes. That way you get perfectly cooked chicken, and of course the topping's already been toasted, so it has all the fried flavor.
So this is oven fried?
Kinda.
Okay.
Yeah. Those look gorgeous, don't they?
Yes, they do, actually. Thank you.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Yeah. So bottom middle rack, 350-degree oven. All right, so I took these out of the oven when they reached 160 degrees, and of course I let them rest for about 5 minutes. Now they are ready to go. I'm gonna give you the big guy. Oh, these look good.
Let's see how well it's cooked there. That's nice, yeah?
That's good.
If you do it in a skillet, sometimes the inside isn't fully cooked and the outside's brown or too brown
or it burns around the
yeah.
edges and all the coating falls off. And of course, the flavor of the nuts really comes through with that browned butter.
Once again, you actually know what you're doing. This is excellent.
And it's super fast, so you can do it on a weeknight.
So take it from Mr. Peanut. We started out with chicken cutlets, poked it with a fork, a little salt, which added some flavor. Next, we used a coating of half panko, half nuts, and we actually sauteed that in some brown butter to add some flavor, also with some shallot. And finally, we put them in a fairly hot oven for about 25 minutes so you get a nice, even cooking and none of the grease from the pan. So there you have it, America's Test Kitchen to your kitchen, a fabulous recipe for nut-crusted chicken cutlets. Nice job. I'm old enough to remember a time when a team of horses was used to cut Timothy instead of a tractor. I'm also old enough to remember a time before the invention of the food processor, at least in the American home kitchen. So we used to use knives to chop, to slice, to do all that stuff. Of course, today, nobody can imagine cooking without a food processor. So here in the Test Kitchen, Adam has rounded up the latest designs, and you've tested them. And you have a winner, I hope.
Welcome to the 21st century. Put down your knife. Things are better now. We have always in the past had good luck with KitchenAid food processors, but there are new models on the market all the time. I found 7 different models to come up against this latest generation of KitchenAid food processor. The range in price was pretty steep. $70 for the low, $875 for the high. This is a professional grade restaurant style food processor called a RoboCoupe. To test these things, we did everything that you would use them for at home. You can see in the clip that we grated hard cheese and carrots. We sliced tomatoes. We chopped celery, onions, and carrots. We ground nuts and breadcrumbs. We cut fat into flour to make pie pastry, and we made pizza dough. A couple of features arose as making a real difference in terms of performance. One of them is the feed tube. You can see in this wider feed tube, the potato, which is an average sized potato, about 8 ounces, actually sits at a slant in here. And I'm gonna go ahead and slice it for you. And what you get when the potato is slanted like that is really uneven slices. And the whole point of having a food processor is to do a nice, neat, easy job. Let me show you this one. The potato fits in straight in a well-proportioned feed tube. And from this food processor, you get nice, neat potato slices. We also found that the blade itself and how the blade was oriented in the bowl made a difference. We can see here that there's actually a 1/4 inch of space between the tip of the blade and the side of the work bowl. Likewise, there's about a 1/4 inch of space under the blade to the bottom of the work bowl. That space made for sloppy chopping and slicing. The blade itself also made a difference. This one you can see is pretty deeply serrated, as opposed to this one, which has a nice, clean, smooth blade. The smooth blade chopped and sliced much more neatly than the serrated one. In terms of other tests, we did a double batch of pizza dough, and some of the machines really struggled. They almost stopped dead in their tracks trying to mix up the ingredients, while others sailed right through. In the end, if money were no object. Is money any object, Chris? Hint,
yes,
hint,
it is.
This was actually a great machine. This is the $875 restaurant legend. It's called the RoboCoupe. It's French. It sailed through every single test. It was fantastic. $875 is not what most people are going to spend. Another model that did very well in all the tests is this Viking 12-cup food processor. My favorite trick of this one is it's got wheels on the back, so you just tilt it and slide it back and forth. You can do wheelies with your food processor, great. It's like wheeled luggage. It's a brilliant innovation, but it doesn't come cheap. This one is $335. The KitchenAid 12-cup food processor, the model number is KFP750, did basically just as well as the Viking and the RoboCoupe on a lot of these tests. The pizza dough, we had to switch from the dough blade to the regular blade in order to bring the dough together. And once we did that, it did a fine job. And this one is just $180.
So the 12-cup KitchenAid, $180 is a real bargain, but you should go to our website, americastestkitchen.com, because as we speak, KitchenAid is redesigning this model, and you can get an update from our website. This is a pig, and we're going to talk about pork. We're actually going to talk specifically about pork chops and how to buy them and what to use them for. Well, you can tell that the biggest section of the pig is the loin. It starts right at the shoulder and goes all the way back to what is actually the ham. And there are 4 different kinds of chops you can get out of the loin. In fact, I have an entire loin right here of a pig. This is from the shoulder butt back all the way to the ham. So this is the front end of the pig towards the shoulder. And the one thing you'll also notice about these chops, there's a lot of connective tissue here, which means that these are great chops. They have a lot of flavor, but they need to be cooked low and slow. Braised, for example. It takes a long time and a fair amount of heat to break down this connective tissue and render some of its fat. The next is the rib section of the loin. These are rib chops. You can get them boneless or on the bone. You can tell there's just that one loin muscle here. These are very easy to cook. They have a fair amount of flavor, not as much as the blade chop. Some fat, and those actually are a great choice. This is what we're going to use for our recipe. Move down a little farther, you get a center cut loin chop, and you can tell you're now in the area of the tenderloin. This is the tenderloin muscle right here. The only problem with this chop is the tenderloin tends to cook a bit more quickly, and it's leaner than this muscle, the loin muscle, so a little bit of uneven cooking, has a little bit less fat than the rib chop. And finally, you have a cut here. You can tell with the loin, a lot of different muscles, it's really not that recommended. There's so many different muscles that cook at different rates. So there are 4 basic chops. The one we like for this recipe is a rib chop, and we're going to take boneless rib chops in the kitchen with Bridget and do crispy pan-fried pork chops. Well, I have to announce that I'm in love.
You are?
Who is it? Well, this is someone, and this is an invitation to whoever wrote this email. You can come to the set, you get a private tour, we'll take you to lunch, you can meet the cast, the whole deal.
You're
going to love this person too.
Absolutely.
She was talking about a recipe we did for whoopie pies. Remember that recipe?
I do.
The marshmallow cream. And she writes, good Lord, working with that stuff is sort of like having, you're gonna love this, to lube a tractor while trying to keep your party dress clean. Now, come on. I mean, I'm in love. So whoever wrote this, if you're watching now, Facebook, Twitter, get hold of us. You got an invitation anytime to come here.
That is poetry.
Come on.
That's beautiful.
Actually, Bridget, you may be in love too.
I might be.
Yes. Matter of fact, Bridget wrote it.
Well, you're in good luck because we're not going to lube anything with these pork chops. We're just going to make great pan-fried pork chop. So let's talk about the pork. Now we're going for simple here. So we're going with a boneless cut, so we don't have to prepare it. You don't have to worry about it curling up around the bone. And we wanted to work with pork chops that you can find readily at the supermarket. So they tend to run between a 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch thick, and each of these weighs about 3 to 4 ounces apiece. So we can fit 4 of these into a pan at once, and we'll only have to make 2 batches. Now another thing, when you're at the supermarket and you're picking out pork chops, we prefer natural, or those that are not enhanced, and that means that they're soaked or treated with kind of a salt solution, similar to brining, but we actually like the natural flavor of pork. So natural, no bone, 3/4 to 1/2 inch thick.
Check.
Got it?
Check.
All right.
Got it.
So next step for a traditional recipe is they would use a bound breading, and that is where the pork chops are dredged in flour and then a little bit of an egg wash and then finally in breadcrumbs.
Been there and done that.
That's exactly right. Well, the problem, and you've got a great example over there, is that the coating tends to flake off in one big shard. It doesn't really stick to the pork chop. Instead of flour, we're going to use cornstarch. This is 1/3 cup. Now, cornstarch has a great ability to wick up moisture. We use it a lot for super crispy coatings. Now, for our egg mixture, we're not going to use any egg at all. In fact, we found that cornstarch really doesn't absorb the moisture from egg very well. Egg works better when it's used with flour.
Okay.
So we need a thinner mixture that the cornstarch will absorb better. So we tried a whole bunch of different things. We tried heavy cream, milk, but what we really liked was the tang of buttermilk. And this is 1 cup of buttermilk. And to doll up those flavors just a little bit more, I've got 2 tablespoons of Dijon mustard and 1 little garlic clove, which we've minced. That's going to go in there.
Okay.
Just whisk all this together. This mixture is so thin that the breadcrumbs would actually soak up the moisture too readily and they would get very gummy. So we look for other options that would stay crispy in milk. And you think about it, actually people have been breading pork chops, chicken, a lot of different things in cornflakes for years and years and years. So this is 3 cups of cornflakes. Of course they're going to stay crispy in milk. Isn't that their advertisement? And we're going to make them into crumbs. All right, so that goes right in our food processor, along with a 1/2 teaspoon each of salt and pepper. And just to make sure that those cornflake crumbs stay nice and crisp, we're going to add more cornstarch. This is 1/3 cup more of cornstarch goes in. All right, so we're just going to process all this until the crumbs are nice and fine. That's only going to take about 10 seconds. That ought to do it. So just put that in our 3rd little shallow bowl. Now, we don't want to just start dipping this away in this because you see the surface of the pork chop is very smooth. So we want to rough up the surface a little bit. So I'm just going to use a paring knife and basically make little cross-hatch marks, about 1/16 of an inch deep, and space them about a 1/2 inch apart. All right, do the same thing. Second side. Now I've got some salt and pepper blended over there. Just want to season these chops right on the surface. That's going to ensure that the pork itself is seasoned well. So into the cornstarch, just lightly coat it. We don't want huge globs of cornstarch under there, but you do want to make sure that it's coated because wherever it is not coated, the bound breading will not stick. And I'm going to use my tongs, just dip it into the buttermilk mixture, make sure it's well coated again, and into the cornflakes. Of course they're going to stay crispy in milk. Isn't that their advertisement? All right, and I don't want too much on there. Now I'm going to put this right on the rack, continue with the rest. All right, last one, Chris. Into the buttermilk, and finally into those crumbs. You always have to hope that there's enough crumbs left for the last one.
That's true.
And there is, plenty. All right, so we're gonna let these sit right on this rack, which is set over a baking sheet, for 10 minutes. And during that time, it's going to help the coating to stick better to the pork chop.
Like all things in the kitchen, there's a bit of science at work here. As Bridget said, the protein in flour, if you use flour and egg wash together, it binds with the eggs to create a very tough coating. We're using cornstarch, which contains starch granules, no protein. They will swell over time as they rest, and some amylose, it's a sticky substance, come out of the granules and form sort of a lacy coating around the starch granules. When we heat that or put that in hot oil, it's a little bit like cotton candy. It turns extremely crispy. So instead of a tough, leathery crust by using cornstarch in a 10-minute rest period, we get a crispy, lacy, delicate outer crust for our pork chops.
All right, so the pork chops have been sitting there for 10 minutes. We're ready to cook, and in the meantime, I went ahead and heated up a 1/3 cup of vegetable oil in this nonstick skillet. We're using nonstick because we're going to cook this in 2 batches. We can easily wipe out the residue of the first batch. Let this heat over medium-high heat until the oil just started to shimmer, and we are there. In they go. Should see a little bit of a sizzle here. And these do not take a long time to cook. Really, just about 2 to 5 minutes on each side should do until they get nice and crispy and golden brown. We want to cook them until they are about 140 in the center.
These look so perfect. It's
Aren't
like,
they
you know,
lovely?
like if Mrs. Paul's pork sticks or something. I mean, they,
I think they look gorgeous.
no, they do, but it's like usually at home things look a little rough and
What's
ready.
wrong with perfect?
Yeah, I wouldn't know.
All right, so it's been about 3 minutes. I want to check on the bottom side, and look at that. Nice tawny brown color. So just going to flip these over. Again, cook these on the second side, 2 to 5 minutes. But really, we're looking for a good internal temperature of about 140. That way we don't overcook the pork chop. So these look nicely browned on the bottom, and checking it. We are right about 140. So these are ready to come off the heat. Now I want to drain these just for about 30 seconds aside, right on paper towels. But we don't want to leave them on there because the paper towels will actually cause the breading to start to steam and it will fall off. So about 30 seconds on each side should do it. All right, so that's good enough. So we're going to put these on a clean rack this time, set over another sheet pan. I want to put these in a warm 200-degree oven while we cook the second batch. All right, so for now, I can get rid of this excess oil. Just put it right into a heat-proof bowl, and I'll wipe out this skillet because we don't want any crumbs in there to get too dark. Another 1/3 cup of vegetable oil goes in, and we'll heat that again over medium-high heat until it starts to shimmer, and then we'll cook the pork chops exact same way, 2 to 5 minutes per side, till they reach 140.
Okay.
All right, so these look perfectly golden on both sides. So we're done with the stove for now. We're almost ready to eat. I went ahead and pulled that first batch out of the oven.
So those are mine.
Those are yours, and these are mine. They smell so good.
They do. Well, you can actually hear how crisp they are when you turn them.
That's right. Crispy pork chop for you, Chris.
Please, lemon wedge.
I would love a lemon
Yes,
wedge.
sir.
Thank you. Just perks it right up. That is moist pork. There's that little bit of buttermilk tang in there. Super crispy. Just try to peel that off. It's sticking to the pork chop as well. See?
And it's also juicy. You
That's
can
right.
See, yeah?
And none of that gumminess on the inside that we got with the flour.
Those are delicious.
Non-stop crunch.
So the secret to extra crispy pan-fried pork chops was to get rid of the flour, egg, breadcrumb concept, the triumvirate, and we started with cornstarch, which actually makes a nice crispy coating when mixed with buttermilk, attaches nicely to the pork chops, and then oddly enough, some cornflakes, a little more cornstarch in a food processor is the final coating, and then they were simply let rest for 10 minutes, so that amylose come out, and make a very crispy coating when they were simply pan-fried on top of the stove for just a few minutes each side. And there you have it, a fabulous recipe from America's Test Kitchen to your kitchen. You can get this recipe, all the recipes from this year's episodes. You can get our tastings, our testings, and watch select episodes of the show if you go to americastestkitchentv.com, and you may follow us on Twitter. Please do, and also on Facebook.
There you go.
Is your face on Facebook?
No, not yet. Just at the post office.
America's Test Kitchen is brought to you by DCS by Fisher & Paykel. America's cooks rely on innovation and culinary precision. DCS by Fisher & Paykel, offering premium indoor and outdoor kitchen appliances.
And by Kohler, inspiring home chefs to create a professional level kitchen with innovative sinks, faucets, and cook centers. Kohler.
And by Diamond Crystal Salt for the professional chef and those who want to cook like one. Diamond Crystal, the gourmet choice. By Cooking.com, an online retailer for the kitchen enthusiast. If it's not in your kitchen, try ours.
By Plum Amazins, diced dried plums from Sunsweet for amazing recipes.
By Miracle Grow, the gardener's friend. And by Chateau Saint Michel.